I'm Joe. Today, on Next Level Bullshit, we look at the stupid in public schools, the stupid in Dallas, and the extreme, beyond comprehension stupid in the war on drugs. What if I told you there are terrorist organizations crossing the border into the US every day? They have the support of several levels of a corrupt government. They have thousands of agents embedded in the US. They use brutal tactics that would make ISIS cringe. Some receive covert support from the US. US intelligence agencies know the exact locations of their bases of operation, yet do very little. In 2011, the president of the country where the terrorists operate refused to petition the UN to classify them as international terrorists. And despite rampant government corruption supporting these terrorists, the country remains both an ally and key trade partner of the US. So who are these terrorist organizations? Hopefully, if you've been playing along at home, you've guessed the Mexican drug cartels. Last week, The Observer in the UK published the results of their comprehensive survey on the effectiveness of the war on drugs. 84% responded that the decades-long war on drugs can never be won. Similar recent polls in the US from Washington Post, Pew Research Center, and others show a nearly identical result among Americans. 63% of Americans support the end of mandatory prison terms for the drug law violations, and only 26% favor prosecuting people who use drugs. Let's have a look at some real data on the war on drugs. The US spends $51 billion annually on the law enforcement side of the war on drugs. But despite that massive budget, the US keeps no statistics on drug-related violence in the US. Nothing. Nada. But those numbers would be ugly. And the war on drugs is all about propaganda. Digging through the FBI data, Narco News found that nearly 6,000 US citizens were murdered in the war on drugs between 2006 and 2010. That's more deaths than from all of the international terrorism during the same period. The effects on US citizens extends well beyond violence. For nonviolent drug crimes, in 2012 alone, more than 1.5 million were arrested. That's a rate of 4,100 every day. And since 2001, more than 300,000 Americans were sentenced. Almost 1 million are on probation, and nearly 300,000 are currently on parole. All of this because of a fake war the US government has no intention of winning. According to a story in the Latin American Herald Tribune, an average of 50 people employed by the Mexican drug terrorists cross the border illegally into California every day. They also reported that U.S. law enforcement agencies have detailed information about U.S. citizens in the employ of Mexican drug terrorists, but do nothing because they've not committed a crime. You can damn well bet if the government knew I was taking a paycheck from Al-Qaeda, I'd be in Gitmo faster than I could say Allah Akbar. In another story, they've reported several occasions of observing U.S. law enforcement watching drug smugglers cross the border and do nothing. The DEA prefers to try and trace the drugs to the destination and seize them there, but that means a lot is missed. On purpose? In Mexico, over 70,000 innocent civilians were killed by narco-terrorists in the past 8 years. So in 2011, Mexican President Felipe Calderon was pressured by internal politicians and military to petition the UN to classify the drug cartels as international terrorist organizations. He refused, citing negative political impact. But an official UN classification as an international terrorist organization opens up a host of new tools to fight these narco-terrorists. For example, there are protocols to seize financial accounts and assets. And the armed forces of the cartels would be targeted by international anti-terror agencies. All of this death and misery is allowed, even encouraged to continue, because it's a money machine. In a Time magazine article earlier this year, court documents revealed how the U.S. government allowed the Sinaloa cartel to operate unimpeded in exchange for information on rival cartels. Making matters worse, the DEA also aided the cartel with weapons and money, and free passage of drugs into the U.S. Government collusion is well documented. Miguel Gallardo funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars of Mexican drug money through the CIA to the Contras. Mexican drugs were flown into the U.S. by CIA asset Juan Marabayarto, I'm a stupid gringo, who was the head of the airline that was used for smuggling drugs. In 1989, several members of the U.S. State Department were involved in drug trafficking to fund covert operations with the Contras. These are just a drop in the bucket involvement of covert U.S. agencies in profiting from the movement of drugs into the U.S. The war on drugs is just a window dressing, like the TSA is a window dressing for security. No one in power actually wants to stop the Mexican and South American narco-terrorists. In a 2012 expose, The Guardian found that a staggering 97.4% of profits of the narco-terrorists are laundered by Western banks. Antonio Maria Costa, former executive director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, said in 2008, proceeds from drugs and crimes were the only liquid investment capital for banks in trouble of collapsing. Law enforcement agencies preserve this cash cow by rarely going after narco-terrorist leadership. In 2011, two whistleblowers, Greg Gonzalez, a retired sheriff's deputy, and Wesley Dunton, a former New Mexico state livestock investigator, told the El Paso Times they couldn't get anyone to investigate that Mexican cartels have corrupted U.S. law officers and politicians in the El Paso border region after big names on the U.S. side of the border began to surface in the drug investigations. Instead of arrests and prosecution of suspects, their whistleblowing has resulted in threats and retaliation. Gonzalez was threatened at knife point, and Dutton was pressured to drop his allegations by state officials. The CIA, FBI, DEA, big banks, and local law enforcement all profit from the war on drugs. They don't care about the lives lost in the bullshit drug laws keeping nonviolent offenders in the prison system for fucked up amounts of time. It's all about power and profits. And it's next level bullshit. Whew. That was intense. Let's lighten things up a bit. Last week, the Dallas Weekly newspaper had a cringe-worthy moment when they released their latest Sunday supplement, A Taste of Africa Comes to Dallas. Yeah, great timing there, guys. Sure, it takes a few weeks to put together a supplement magazine for a Sunday newspaper, but you can't tell me no one had good enough taste to pull it and maybe run it later? Or at least use a map of Africa that is current. Or better yet, don't rip one off online because you're too cheap to buy one. Yeah, we can see your terrible photo editing skills. And so did most of the internet. For horrible timing and absolute laziness, you get strong bullshit. This past Saturday marked the first time ever on broadcast television that no cartoons aired. Sit on that for a moment. Now things are about to get even weirder. Schools in Washington and some states are starting to remove swings from playgrounds because they're unsafe. Yep, due to Sue Happy helicopter parents, modern playgrounds suck ass. But in this overprotective case in Washington, the cost of hiring contractors to remove the swings is more than 15 years of the increase in the insurance. What's next? Restricting recess because too many accidents happen? Oh, that's already happening. This is extreme next level bullshit. That wraps up our 10th episode and over 50,000 views of our videos. I want to thank all our viewers and commenters for their support and subscriptions. If you have an idea for something we should cover, send us a tweet with hashtag NLBS. Or tell us what you think is next level bullshit in your own YouTube video. If we like it, we'll use it. You can also email me ideas at joe@nextlevelbullshit.com. We'll see you Thursday with another episode. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, and watch all our shows on nextlevelbullshit.com. Until then, move over, Grumpy Cat. Make way for Garfy. The angriest cat in the world. Clearly, he's as upset with the war on drugs as you and I. Or about Obamacare. Or gun control. Or just everything.